Our Sawtooth Forum and Lecture Series, brought to you by the Sawtooth Interpretive and Historical Association, which is a mouthful, so you can call us SEHA. I'm Jenna Downing, a naturalist working for SEHA at the Redfish Visitor Center and Gallery, when there isn't a fire. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that here in Sawtooth country, we are in the unceded and traditional lands of the Agadeka and Dugadeka bands of the Shoshone-Bannock tribes. We pay respect and honor to the tribes and all indigenous people who have continuously stewarded this land for generations. This program is free of charge thanks to our primary sponsors, Redfish Lake Lodge and the McNichol family, in memory of Roland McNichol, who was an avid series attendee and a steward of the Sawtooths. We thank our sponsors for their continued support. As you may know, the association is a member-based nonprofit. Our mission is to protect and advance the natural and cultural history of Idaho's Sawtooth Salmon River country through preservation and education. Tonight we are eager to hear from Krista Willmorth, who will be presenting Savoring the Sawtooths, Foraging as Stewardship in the Mountain West. Krista is the owner of fungalforager.com, a business dedicated to sharing her experience foraging for edible mushrooms and other wild foods in Idaho and the Mountain West. Her eBook, How to Find Morel Mushrooms in Idaho and Beyond, a comprehensive beginner's guide, has helped many discover and identify their first wild morels.
All right, I am just so happy to be here, so thank you for inviting me, SEHA, and I get a chance to talk about two of my favorite subjects. That's foraging in Idaho and making foraging accessible / available to an even wider audience. And I appreciate you making it out with the warmer weather, although it's cooled down a little bit today, and the potential smoke coming in and out, so just many thanks. A bit later in the presentation, I will talk a little bit more about wildfires and in the Mountain West and kind of their impact on the plants and the trees and the fungi that grow in our area. We have some unique species to forage here that we likely wouldn't have without the fire pressure. But first, I usually give these talks to like a school group or mushroom club, or when we're out like walking and able to touch and pick things. And so I usually know a little bit more about my audience going in, and I don't know anything about y'all, so I'd like to just ask a few questions and get a little idea. First of all, like, who here has some experience with foraging? Like anything? Oh, that's good. So like berries, I mean, going out on a walk and picking brambleberries, or you know, a really nice watermelon from the produce section. I mean, that counts. So that's good. Maybe 20% of the people here. I think it's probably a little bit more. So going on about the questions, are there any gardeners? Okay, so you know a little bit about plants that way, probably more than you think. That will apply to foraging. Then are there any wild foods that you've heard about that might be here that you're particularly interested in knowing more about?
Yes.
What?
Well, morels.
So morels? Anything else? Yeah.
Huckleberries.
Huckleberries? Yes, yum.
Gooseberries.
And gooseberries, great. We're going to sample something with gooseberries in it tonight. As I finally found some gooseberries here 2 weeks ago that actually taste good. So.
What about like onions? There's some that are safe and some that aren't, maybe? Or one that's a lookalike? Is that?
Well, pretty much with onions, there are a bunch of different alliums and kind of garlics and onions, and if it smells like an onion, you're good. You're somewhere in the garlic or onion or whatever family. And I don't usually give out any kind of general edibility rules, but that's kind of a general edibility rule. So you know what an onion smells like, probably. Okay, so great. So I want you to think back to your childhood, and no need to answer out loud, but what did you learn about food from your parents or your caregivers or people who were making your food? Or were you cautious or picky about new foods, or were you more like me, bit more omnivorous and sampled everything, especially if it was out of reach? When I was 3, my mom tells me that she found me on top of the refrigerator. I had figured out how to climb up to the top of the refrigerator and the cabinet that was up there. And I had gotten the baby aspirin bottle open with the childproof cap and was just popping baby aspirin like they were candy because I liked the taste. I've learned a bit more about foraging safely in the 47 years since then. So, don't worry, you're in good hands. That said, 4 years ago, I did tear a ligament in my knee. I was climbing up a little mountainside and over some scree, and I was after some service berries, and the service berries were delicious. The physical therapy bill was not so much, but that was also about me just being stupid about my shoe choice and not having a way to collect those berries and carry them down safely. So just all that is to say, if you're trying to learn about foraging, you could do worse than somebody who's highly food driven. So that's me. I just really enjoy this stuff, and I want more people to be able to do it. Just simply, foraging is just looking around for things to eat and use. And so I say we're doing that all the time. I know lots of people are wondering about the edibility of the things around us, because the number one question I get through my Fun Gal Forager site is, what is this? And it is followed closely. Usually they send a picture like this. It's like one view, more or less in focus. And, so they're like, what is this mushroom? And is it eatable? And the eatable part really bugs the grammar nerd in me, but that's, for some reason, that's just how it comes out. And that's like asking, who is this guy and should I marry him? You have to know a little bit more about what you've got. So while I totally respect the curiosity that's involved in that, I mean, it's just natural. As soon as people start going out and looking after mushrooms or getting interested in that kind of thing, they just want to know, is it edible? Like, can I do something with this? It's just a seems to be human nature. If you're going to be eating something, and especially feeding it to someone else, your children, family, you just must have a level of certainty. And you can't just really wish that the thing in your hand is a medicinal yarrow or an elderberry or a cow parsnip that are all edible and useful. But they look similar, but they're not the same. You just can't really wish that it's that thing when it's possibly something else that looks kind of similar, but it's poison hemlock and it's deadly in just small amounts. So you have to be certain. Or you've got your morel mushrooms. You've got several varieties here. We've got a blonde one. We've got some mountain black morels and another type of blonde up there. All edible and delicious. And over here we've got a toxic Gyromitra esculenta. Some people call them false morels. I hate the term false morels because anything that's not a morel is a false morel. And there's a whole bunch of things lumped into false morel, some of which are perfectly edible and good. This one is not. This one will kill you if you eat enough of it, and sometimes if you're cooking them indoors and just the steam and the off-gassing from them is enough to make you sick. So, be certain. Super forager, Samuel Thayer, so if you're interested in anything foraging, I'd say get his books. I have his quote-unquote field guide. It's
Ooh,
nothing you're going to take in a field, but it does, and it says it's Eastern and Central North America, but all of those little labels and things are things I've found here or I know, should be here. I've done some investigation, so really super helpful, but he just talks about the way to think about foraging that's super helpful, super useful. So he talks about, in his books, banana level certainty. So look at that, it's a banana. And so I'm sure everyone here could pick a banana out of a produce section, and you could go to another country and you could pick it out of a produce section there, even if they were like the little finger bananas like I had in the Philippines. You'd probably know it was a banana, and you'd know it was a banana if it was yellow or if it was green and unripe, and you'd probably even know it wasn't ripe if it was green, or if it was brown and mushy. You'd still know it was a banana. And you could probably go to another country where they grow. They're growing on a tree. And even if you've never seen them growing on a tree before, you could probably go, hey, that's a banana. And be pretty certain that you were right. So when you're looking for something that you're going to eat and you're identifying it, you need to have that level of certainty. Knowing it in different seasons too. There are definitely plants and mushrooms that can kill you, even in small amounts. So do your homework. I don't want to scare you away from foraging, but I do want you to pay attention. So that's my due diligence. So deadly toxic seems to be a phrase that gets people to perk up and pay attention. Where do you go from here and learn how to fill your baskets safely? As my friend says, how to learn how to do a few more and not die. That's what we're going for. Fortunately, the number of deadly toxic plants and mushrooms is really small compared to how many there are out there, and even how many edible ones there are out there. There's a lot more that would give a healthy adult a really bad day or two, and a few that are not toxic, like this. This is a Fomatopsis, a conch mushroom. They grow off the sides of trees. They're a rotter, and it's like wood. I mean, when they're young, they're a little bit soft and fresh, and it's not toxic, but it's really bitter, and it's inedible, basically. So that's where you've got your deadly toxic, you've got your super choice edibles, and you've got your bell curve. There's a lot in the middle. The good news is, if you can figure out how to tell the difference between a cantaloupe and a honeydew melon, or a rose and a carnation, you've got everything you need to be able to start figuring out what you can eat and forage. And it just takes practice and time. And you can reduce the time that it takes by a few things. We're going to be learning to recognize the plant patterns and the forest habitat, or habitat, period, that you're in. And many mushrooms, for example, they have particular tree or plant associations, and they only grow with that tree or plant available. And many more, like plants and fungi, kind of cluster by habitat. So you learn the habitat, and then you kind of know what to expect. And you'll start to be able to go, it's about that season. I'm going to go up and look in the Douglas fir forest or wherever, and I'm going to expect to find a few, certain things. And you'll get to know that a little bit better. Soil type and temperature, precipitation, elevation, they all play a role there. So I want to start with kind of the biggest picture, because that's just a little 10,000 foot view, a little easier way to get into it. And just bear with me, I'm going to go on a little tangent about morels for a little while, but I will bring things back to kind of our wider foraging talk. So this is a map of where we are. So we've got Stanley right here and Clayton up there, and going down into Redfish down here, or right there. And it's overlaid with U.S. Forest Service forest type map. My friend Trent Blizzard's the latest burn morel mapping app, so some of you might have heard of that. He publishes it but he's added some really neat features, and that's one of them. Just quick shameless plug for it. Modern forager. He's like a morel hunting fiend. It's a hobby that he had. He would take all the burn maps that he could get access to, and now even the stewardship fires, and he collates those all, and he pulls into the U.S. Forest Service mapping and precipitation maps now, and so it's all combined in there, and then he makes that available each year, and it renews. And the funny thing is, like, he gets sick from like most species of morels, so he doesn't really even eat them. He just loves to hunt them and share them with other friends. So I will admit to being a bit of a burn morel snob before a few years ago. I was kind of snobby about hunting burn morels versus natural morels. So if you didn't know, I should say that there are many different types of morels. I've got a little chart over there of like 40 that are pretty common in our area. They're all edible, and you'd all recognize them as a morel. Roughly, they fall into two categories. This is a Morchella snyderi. This is a mountain morel, your typical black morel. It's got kind of these uneven little honeycomb pattern. And then you've got burn morel species, and there'll be a whole bunch of species in this category and a whole bunch of species in this category. These have more like ladder-like pits and ridges. Natural morels tend to grow in like established higher elevation forests or a lower elevation riparian, that means river areas with the cottonwoods. And they fruit year after year, not always, but they fruit generally year after year, kind of in the same spots. They generally take a little more walking to collect them, because you'll find some here, a little cluster there, walk for a little while, find some more. So if somebody shares one of those spots or takes you to one of those spots, like, know that you are getting a high honor, and so don't abuse that. Don't share that spot. Don't take somebody else with you at another time, without that person. But the other type are the burn morels, and these can sometimes fruit in like absolutely astonishing numbers after a wildfire. So this is generally where like commercial pickers are coming in, or you get a lot of people coming in. They know that there's a burn. They're going to go to that area because you can just gather a whole bunch in a much shorter time. But they usually just fruit for a year or two afterward, and then they peter out. So if you've got a place where you can go year after year, it's better. And hunting in a burn can be messy and muddy and ashy, and there can be a lot of other people around. So anyway, like I said, I was kind of a snob. Since I had places where my family has gone for like 20 years, and we've always found them, I was like, I don't need to hunt in a burn. But I had a comeuppance. Last year, for various reasons, it just was an absolutely terrible year for natural morels. For me, and for most of my friends who are really good at finding them, there's like, it's terrible. Like, I can count on one hand, like, how many I've found in the beginning of the spring. So I was like, well, maybe I'll check out Trent's maps this time. I'll go ahead and fork over the money and sport them, and scoped out the maps and found a southern side entry to get in there, and went up with some friends and just said, well, we'll try. Like, we haven't found anything else, but they were in town for just a couple days, so we stopped off without very high expectations, walked about 100 yards from where we parked, and or maybe just 100 feet, and my friend's like, hey, I think that's Win. So here he is. And that one you can actually see because he's got the sun coming through it, but usually they look like a charred piece of, mud. We all did what I recommend everybody does, like at the beginning of the season when you're finding your first morels, or if it's your first time going out finding morels. Once you found one or somebody's found one, just everybody stop and take a really close look at it. Because it's like we have to remind our brains, and I have to do this every year, like, this is what I'm looking for. This is the pattern I'm looking for. Don't ignore that. Don't overlook it. And so we looked, and we're looking at this. Then we were asking ourselves, like, why is it here? Like, Why is it here and not there? Is there a certain tree above it? Is it in a shady spot or a sunny spot? And it turned out this was like an old road cut, and so it had just been the shrubbery that had started growing here, recovering after the fire. This was kind of a mosaic burn, so like there were parts that didn't burn, and it was just perfect for morels. But anyway, that was a drip line, so they'd been dripping off here. So then we looked side to side, and there's just a line of morels going this way and a line of morels going that way, and so that was kind of an epic day of just then following that pattern. You could kind of look from a distance and go, I think that looks kind of like the same kind of area, and so you just go over there and don't really spend time looking everywhere. You kind of look where you learn that they're going to be. So these are morels, and I thought from a distance they were all molding, but I got up close, and these are like willow seeds that were blowing through the air, kind of like cottonwood does, and they were collecting on the morels. And then I got up close, and in all of the little pits, they had sprouted. The willow seeds had sprouted. So that was just wild. And I've just been so curious about that since I saw it, and I've been asking like my mycologist friends and ecologist friends and stuff, like, what's going on there? And so far I haven't run into anybody who has an idea, and maybe I just haven't asked the right people, or it hasn't been studied. But my opinion, for what it's worth, that I came up at 3 o'clock in the morning when I was thinking about that was just, I think those seedlings, like, they have a really good competitive advantage. Like, they found a place that's like composty and warm and dark, and they're gonna be able to like sprout just as this mushroom rots. And anyway, going back this year to the same place, there's just willow everywhere. Like, so many. You can hardly like walk through the places that were burned. And so that's looking out. So this is some of the burn. Like, you can see that the leaves got burned off, and a lot of the trees remained. This is thimbleberry, so it's like a raspberry that you'll only ever be able to eat by foraging, because they're like a little tasty cloud. They won't travel anywhere, so you just got to kind of pick them as you travel. But this was all in the first year after the burn, just as spring was getting started. And then I went back this year on this same trail, and it's like completely covered the trail. Like, there's just a little pathway there. So whatever's happening there, I think the whole burn ecology cycle is just working really well there. There's also fireweed up there. What happens is they burned off some of the overstory, so now sun can get to places where it wasn't. And that's a species that just can't deal with any competition, really, or too much shading. Then it's going to be helping to regenerate the soil as the trees slowly grow back in, and we've got the willows and stuff up there that will be leafing out, and elderberry, as they're kind of covering that up, and there'll be less of that. That's gonna just decompose back up into the soil, and it all works together. And then also in this area, there's huckleberries all in there, so that's a good forest type to be looking for huckleberries. And the huckleberries that were along the edges of the mosaic burns, of course there were some in the burns, they got burned off, but then along the edges this year, those are like extra bushy and big, so there's some nutrients from the fire going along those edges. And then those ones that were burned probably won't recover right away as far as the huckleberries go, but they're underneath there, and as long as the ground hasn't kind of been sterilized, they'll be coming back. And what that does is set up the huckleberry patches for the next 50 to 75 years that are going to be really great, So just give it 5 or 6 years and remember where some of those fires are, and you may be having, that's the patches you and your kids and grandkids are going to be harvesting. So burn morels, as the name implies, are found in the wildfire burn scars, but if you'd like to find other types of morels, the naturals, then it helps to find out a bit about the forest type that you're in. If I'm looking for natural morels in the spring, I'm going to go as the snow begins to recede, and the ground warms up, I'm going to start looking in the lower elevation riparian areas along the rivers, especially if there's cottonwoods along there. And then I'm also going to be looking for other kind of friends in the neighborhood that go along here. There's stinging nettle. It likes wet feet, so it's going to be down there in those kind of boggy stream side areas. This is a black raspberry. I'm also going to be looking for the flowering things, elderberries potentially, service berries, different things. Those are all going to be like flowering at that time, and that's a easy way to like mark those things. And also, if you don't find morels, which many times you don't when you're first out looking for them, you can find something else that's edible or useful. Nettles are super nutritious. I grab a bunch every year and dry them, and then I powder them, put them in soups or smoothies or that sort of thing. And the stings are totally neutralized just by like rubbing them a bunch in a, you don't have to do it with your hands. Mine gets done, but I've just gotten used to it. But you can crush them up or dry them or blanch them in some hot water or cook them, completely neutralized and totally edible. But then later in the year, as the morels kind of follow spring, they go up in the air, or up in the elevation as spring progresses. Then I'm going to look more in the Douglas fir kind of forests, just because, not because morels won't grow with the pines, they certainly do. It's just the lodgepole pine areas tend to be a lot drier, a little less nutrient rich. There's not as much duff underneath, and they can be really, really dense too. So there's like not a lot of light can get to the ground. But the Douglas fir forests, on the other hand, you can find areas where there's rivers and creeks and springs and stuff, and you want to look for that like deep humus in there. And they'll have a little more space where it's like alternately places where you can keep the moisture in the ground. That's good for the mycelium, the kind of the roots of the mushroom. But then also open areas where the sun can get in and warm up the ground. In Boise, it's very early April. That's when I start looking for the morels along the Boise River. And then into mid-April. And then here I would estimate, you're probably a couple weeks behind that just because your elevation's a little bit higher, so you kind of go by when the snow is retreating. Then I go up probably by early May to mid-May. I'm like in the peak season around 3,500 to 4,500 feet, and then you can kind of go up in elevation. Usually I'm kind of done by the end of June, because the places I go are generally around 6,000, 6,500. But if you have access to an old burn, or you are up higher, you can find them into July and August. And I had a friend last year who lives up in Cascade, and he was finding morels in the Four Corners burn until October when the snow flew, and he just stopped. But he was up at like 8,500 feet, so if you go up where other people don't go, then you get the things that other people don't get. But there is a species that I would be looking in the pine forest for a little bit later in spring, and that's this is a spring king, Boletus rexvaris. So it's part of the Boletus edulis group, or porcini seps. Every mushroom eating culture around the world has a name for this one because they all eat it and love it and find it. My favorite is probably the German steinpilns. It's a rock mushroom because they really do look like rocks from the top. And that's, I'd be looking in the lodgepole pine forest because these have a relationship with pines. And they have I'll try to go super briefly on kind of some mushroom types, but these are mycorrhizal mushrooms, and that means that they've got a relationship with the trees, and they are bringing minerals and sometimes water, some nutrients up into the tree roots. They're actually growing around and into the tree, tiny tree roots, and then they can't photosynthesize, so they're getting sugar from the tree in this great relationship. So that's a large group of mushrooms. So for mycorrhizal mushrooms, you can, like chanterelles, it's another one, you can learn the trees and you have a much better chance of finding the mushrooms. Then there's a whole nother, there's saprobic mushrooms, and those are like your oyster mushrooms or lion's mane that are growing on decaying wood or vegetation. And so you can find those potentially a lot more often during the year, just because they've got a place to grow, substrate. And then there are like parasitic mushrooms, like the humongous fungus in Oregon, the honey mushroom, armillaria. That's bad news for the trees because they will actively attack like a living tree, and they are not in a. They're in a toxic relationship with that tree. And so, by now you might be thinking, I just wanted to learn how to identify like a few things I could eat, and now you're telling me I have to like learn all the trees and all of this kind of stuff. So I'm not telling you, it's only sort of. You only sort of have to do that. You can pick like one plant or one mushroom to start with, and learn all about it. And I do recommend when you're beginning to start that way. But there are ways to help your research do like double and triple duty that will make you be able to learn a lot faster. And one of those ways is to start with the forest types, like we talked about, learn the neighborhood. And the best way is just to take a regular hike or walk where you live, if that's in the city or if that's up here, just wherever you are, and just take a walk and look at the things that are growing. Stop just thinking it's a wall of green and go, why is that flowering? Why is that bee on that plant? There's a very blue bird, what is that bird? And just be curious and look at the plants, like, do they have fruits on them? What do their seeds look like? How are the leaves arranged? Do they like smell like something when you walk through them? Or if it's a mushroom, does it have gills underneath the cap, like your regular store bought mushrooms? Or does it have spongy pores like this? I can't really see, but looks like a sponge, or has maybe little spines. That's all going to help you figure out what that thing is. And you'll get really surprised by the kinds of things you'll be able to figure out and learn and observe just by doing it a few times and just getting started. And then one day, if just choose something that catches your eye that you're like, I really want to know what this thing is, and then take some really good pictures of it and upload it to the iNaturalist app. iNaturalist.org. They do have an AI in it, so they have an associated app called Seek that it's one of those plant identifier apps, so you can kind of use it to get a ballpark of the Seek app, and then you can upload that to iNaturalist. But just bear with me if you know about people misidentifying things based on, the app said it was this. It's really great because it's more of a positive social media. That's what the designers started it as, was they really want people to interact, and they've purposely made a few things like difficult to do quickly because they want the interaction between people. They want people to be interacting and discussing these things. And so you're going to upload your pictures, you get an account. I don't have time to get into it, but there's tutorials and stuff on the app. The one thing I do say is they have a phone app, but it doesn't have as many features, so I use it on my computer, or if I'm on my phone, I use the browser instead of the phone app, and you can get there. But you'll upload those pictures. It has an AI in there that's getting better, and it will give you an idea of what that is. But you can choose that or not choose that, and then someone eventually will come along who's an expert potentially in that insect or plant or whatever, or mushroom, and they'll they'll like put an identification on it, and then somebody else will come along and say, yeah, I think that is that, or no, I don't think it's that thing, and eventually you'll get some agreement, hopefully. So if you have mushrooms on there, tag me at Fungal Forager, and I will help you identify those things. You can also use iNaturalist to look at other things that are, you can use the explore function and you can see what's growing in your area right now, like what people are taking pictures of, or if there's a specific species that you're looking for, like morels or whatever. People aren't going to tell you exactly where the morels are. You can obscure your location on there, but you can, people definitely do post that they're there. So you could be like, okay, well at least I know this, they're in this forest somewhere. So you can get kind of closer. And then another huge thing that's going to help you is to learn really broad categories first rather than the individual species, because by definition you've got a lot fewer categories to learn than there are species to learn. So tree type is the next thing you're going to want to notice. Are they mostly evergreen or conifer, or are they deciduous trees, the kind of trees that lose their leaves in the fall? Around here, conifers predominate. Expanding beyond that is this wonderful book, which I've checked out at the library so many times that I finally just bought it last night so I could bring it to this talk. And this is a fantastic resource. I just realized he updates it pretty constantly, so this is a much better version than the one in the library. And he talks about plant families, and it's just a wonderful, easy way for even kids to very quickly learn the plant families that are going to get you started. So there's 8 plant families that he has you start with. And so if you learned that the plant you're looking at, there's a good chance it's going to fall into one of those eight families. Not guaranteed, but a good chance. And then if you know which family it's in, you've already eliminated 80% of what it could be. Or 80% of what it's not. So it's a much easier chance that you'll be able to then do some sleuthing around on the internet and ask some people, trying to figure out what it is. So he divides them into mint, parsley, mustard, pea, lily, grass, rose, and aster families. And so they share broad physical characteristics, but they also often share similar medicinal properties or tastes or other uses. There you go. You've got a few conifers, a couple of deciduous trees, and you've got 8 plant families that you can learn pretty quick. It'll be easier when I'm not talking at you. And he's actually got a little card game that's great for kids and adults, and you can do memory with it, and you'll learn him in just a couple minutes. It really doesn't take that long. So if you do that, go from there and learn 1 or 2 plants or mushrooms at a time, and you stay curious and observe them throughout the year, and go on plant and foraging walks if you can find them, and talk to your friendly local ecologist or forest ranger when you're out. You'll be on your way, and you will be learning how to learn. And once that starts to happen, then you'll be able to do 5 species in a year, and 10. It goes on from there. So I came up just a couple of weeks ago to kind of scout the area so I could kind of tell you what's out here right now. It's really hot and dry, so there's not a lot of mushrooms. What I found were desiccated and dry oyster mushrooms, but just on the drive and a short walk, just from the car, I spotted over 30 species that are edible or useful, medicinal, and so I used a whole bunch of those to make a sawtooth kind of syrup. So it's following Pascal Baudard's method. I've got his book up here, so if you're on Instagram or something, I definitely recommend following him if you like, or you think you like foraged foods. He's amazing at kind of making things that have a sense of place. And so I I gathered a whole bunch of species. I've got currants and gooseberries and Douglas fir cones and, or I mean not, Douglas fir tips and spruce tips and some lodgepole pine cones, little green cones in there, which doesn't sound very appetizing, but I think you will find it's really good. I also put some fireweed tea in there and layered it with sugar and some Meyer lemons. So the lemons are the only thing there to put acid in there and help give a little liquid. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to dissolve the sugar, and also to keep it safe, so that the sugar is a preservative, but also the acid, sugar and acid balance in there keeps it safe. So it's basically a shelf-stable syrup. Anyway, that's all been brewing for a couple weeks now, and we'll be able to share it in some mocktails and stuff here afterward. And that's something you won't be able to get anywhere else. Like, but then you can go to your home, wherever that is, and you'll be able to learn, like, oh, here's this thing that I maybe wouldn't want to make a salad of. I wouldn't want to eat a whole thing of it, but it's got some spice to it, or it's got some flavor. Like, there's yarrow in there too. You know, I wouldn't eat a bunch of that, but as a little kind of peppery addition, it's really, really good. So you'll be able to make your own version eventually. So my closing topic then is getting more foragers out foraging as a way to kind of protect our amazing shared spaces that we've got here. We're just really blessed in Idaho with all of our public lands and diverse landscapes, and I really want to make sure that those continue to be available to everybody and manage so that we can all access them and enjoy them. And my experience has been that when people begin gathering food from an area and feeding it to their families, that they just get a much deeper connection to that area, and they care what happens to it. Like, is it getting paved over? Is it burning? Are people trashing it, bringing in, or spraying sides on it, you know, herbicides or pesticides, or, you know, like, what's happening to it? And then they also, if you find a place that has morels or whatever, things that you want, huckleberries that you want to come back to year after year, you want to make sure you can come back to those year after year. So I think educating more and more foragers to know more about what's there is going to be the key to helping keep those places preserved. And in his book, Tristan Gooley, his book How to Read a Tree, he was talking about the impact that we make when we're interacting with nature, like a trail being worn through a patch of moss or something on a regular walking path. He says, even though we risk harming all nature when we walk through it, I'm a firm believer that nothing is at greater risk than the invisible. And I totally agree. Even though our hiking and foraging makes an impact, we're removing plants, fruits, and mushrooms that otherwise would have stayed there. I think the true risk is when we lose touch with the sense of our place in nature, that, you know, we're a part of it, not just affecting it. So if we're only told, like, don't touch or just look, instead of ask, like, hey, what's that? Can you tell me why that's interesting to you, or why you like that? Then we start looking at nature as something that's out there, that needs to stay static and untouched, and instead of what it is, which is a living, interdependent ecosystem that's alive and changing. So, is foraging for personal use only extractive? Or can it instead be a net positive for the environment? And I'm sure you can guess where I fall on that. And the key for me as to whether our impact is positive or negative is the education and intent of the foraging community. From the burn, that's a lot of morels, and some people might look at that and go, did you leave any for anybody else, or, you know, for the forest? And I'll say that's only a portion of what I collected, actually going back weekly over a course of 6 weeks, and so that might look like too many, but for starters, picking a mushroom is not, you're not destroying that organism by picking it up. Most of the organism is under the ground in the mycelium. It's going about doing its thing. That's a fruiting body, a reproductive organ of the mushroom. So taking it off is like plucking an apple from a tree. Also, that fire covered 14,000 acres in very steep and rugged terrain, and so I can guarantee that as many people as were in that burn, and it was a lot, it was great. There was like little babies in backpacks and grandpa and grandma and people having just a heyday. It was wonderful. We could only reach a tiny fraction of what was there, and so most of them were just out doing their thing, whatever it was that they do, whatever role they fill in that ecological niche. And then also a whole nother generation of Idahoans, and there were like people from other countries and people from elsewhere in the country were out there having just a great time, and that's a memory that they will take with them and teach their kids and maybe come back and be able to do it elsewhere. And so those are things that if we can help teach people how to do those kinds of things with less of an impact, or the minimum impact, then I think we should do that. When it comes to plants, like the more people know about the growth habits of those particular plants, the more likely they are to harvest in sustainable ways. So something like ramps, those are wild leeks that an onion, in onion family, they grow back east, and they've come under a lot of pressure from overzealous commercial harvesting and habitat loss. I think it's probably more the habitat loss than even the commercial harvesting. But so there's many people now that advocate taking like just one leaf from like every third plant, because that'll grow back, plant and continue to thrive, and never ever taking a bulb, because that removes the entire plant. And I do agree that we need to be careful about what we forage in our common spaces and places that have a lot of pressure, so like in parks and things where a lot of people know that there are things to forage there. But sometimes what's best in the case of the ramps for the overall life of a ramp patch is paradoxically to actually remove more of the bulbs. So Sam Thayer, the person I had the picture of his book up there earlier, he's done many years of research on this in his own private lands where he's got ramp patches and also ones that he's harvested from year after year after year. And I don't have time for that, but I recommend, if you're interested in the topic, Googling Sam Thayer and ramp sustainability, because he's got a great video on all of the research that he's done. But he's found that carefully disturbing the ground around in a ramp patch and removing just select bulbs, like a well-educated forager would do, actually disturbs the ground a little bit and makes space for those seeds from the ramp. So they can reproduce by the bulbs and the seeds. Those seeds can then germinate next year, and then you come back and the bulbs that were left are larger next year. So Robin Wall-Kimmerer, I know somebody mentioned braiding sweetgrass. She also talks about the sweetgrass that's traditionally managed by the indigenous tribes, and they've also done research on patches that were left untouched, like nobody going in there and doing anything, and patches that were managed as they would. They were taking sweetgrass for baskets and ceremonial purposes and things. And the patches that had human disturbance and were managed were doing better. The plants were healthier. There were more of the plants than in the places that had been left untouched. So it's not a cut and dried black and white issue. I think it's education is the key. So don't get me wrong, I do think there's place for guidelines and safety rules, and you absolutely, if you're going to go out foraging, it's on you to talk with the Forest Service or whoever's managing the land where you're going to be foraging to find out what the guidelines are. But I think we have an opportunity to join forces with more. So we've got government groups, Forest Service, Parks and Rec, and land trust organizations, all that kind of thing. I think the more we're able to partner with them and foragers and do things like this and get education out, I think the better it's going to be for everybody. Last year I kind of joined forces with a group of foragers and a few herbalists and Boise Parks and Recreation to teach people about St. John's wort, which is a medicinal plant that I collect to make a pain relieving salve and a liniment. It's also, people have used it for a long time for alleviating depression. But it's on the city's noxious weed list. So it is invasive, it's kind of growing all over the foothills. So we just teamed up and every person came in with a little different aspect of St. John's wort, and we educated people about it, and then we all went out as a group, and the person in charge of the weed program with Boise Parks and Rec showed us where some was. We all actually, she's like, this is what you need to do to, like, you don't even have to pull it all up, just top it, which is perfect because that's what we needed for our our medicine. Then we all went back and we made some oil and infused oil, and it was really great. So now there's, you know, it was a small start, but maybe there's like 20 people now who know about that didn't know before, and now they can go out and help go to places where one individual Parks and Rec person isn't going to be able to get to. So thank you so much for your time and attention. I know I went long. I did practice and try to keep it shorter, but there's just so many things I wanna help you with. But I'm happy to take any questions, and then I have some fermented fireweed iced tea that I made, and the Sawtooth syrup mocktails, and some currant jam, and some dockseed crackers that I made to put the jam on, so we can all share those afterwards. And I've got a bunch of books and stuff, and I'm happy to let people talk.